So it's probably best to go over simply some of your points of view, see if we can't, clarify a few things. Nothing too heavy, just some, easygoing ideas. And we can go from there. We can splinter off if you like, go on to different things. But I thought I'd get some, somewhat interesting questions out of the way. Shall I kick off?
Yeah.
Okay. Why do people believe crazy things?
Okay, why do people believe crazy things? Well, it is not necessarily a complicated question. But people, first of all, rely, and then they come to believe, of course, in gullible, credulous things, more because rather than facts, of course. And without a testing and counter-testing, if they are really interested about such things, and without an analysis about what the object of that belief is really all about, and if there is an object at all, by the way, people come to rely to credulous psychological activities, and then sticking to a particular mindset or ideology of this and that. Well, why do people act that way? Since we weren't born that way. We were born ignorant, but we weren't born credulous and stupid and aimed to live a life captured under the dome of specific belief. And by belief, we have to be precise, because we are not just referring to religious or spiritual beliefs, but we are referring to also I would say ideologies in general, because a religious belief or a spiritual belief is, first of all, an ideology, which means in a technical if you want to explain it technically, it is no longer an idea or a theory. It's something that is conceived as the truth, while it's not, and perhaps it's completely made up by the culture and so on. So, why do people believe crazy things? It is not really a mysterious reason. The reason why is quite obvious, and the reason is that the magical thinking and this sort of related hope and all of this sort of stuff are surely more, let's say, cognitively speaking, more seducing than alluring than logic. A logic implies a serious skeptical self-analysis, first of all, and then the analysis of the outside, of the external reality. Then this credulous activity and reliance mostly takes place among fragile minds. Indeed, it's a matter of fact that fragile minds, by fragile minds we refer to people that are stuffed with irrational fears and preoccupations. Rather than skeptically questioning one after another, they rather prefer to stick, to rely, to hold to the basic forms of popular credulity, and then up to the most crazy stuff, which is pretty much a characteristic, especially of the so-called modern New Age movement and the whole apparatus that usually people call spirituality, that is gravitates around this modern, messed up, confusing, illusory and also dangerous ideology of nowadays, especially in the Western world.
I think people just really want to believe it. And with the law of attraction teachings out there, they get the idea that if they believe it, then they can make it true, and therefore they can make it true for other people. And they do not see that. It's just self-manipulation. And they project that out onto others. And if you tell yourself something over and over again, you forget that it's something you invented or hoped or want to be true. It becomes true to them, but that does not mean it is true. It does not make it true.
But we can say something very straight. That there are so many people over there that they they really think, that they convince themselves, and then they even preach about this false distinction between religiosity and spirituality. Like to say something very straight, there is not such a thing as a distinction between a religious mindset and a spiritual mindset, because if we think also a little bit more historically, we can clearly see that each single religion or sectarian, mystical, esoteric mindset and belief, whatever it was, took place originally from a sense of spirituality and the reliance to that. So, to be more specific, let's say from an anthropological and historical perspective, there is a distinction between religion and spirituality, but it is only a technical and an historical distinction. And the distinction, it is obviously the fact that a religion is more consolidated, it is more old, it is more largely accepted also by global institutions and by constructed sense of morality, such as freedom of religion, which by the way also implies freedom of indoctrination, but we do not say that, we do not mention that part when we used to speak about freedom of religions, because it doesn't appeal to us, it's too inconvenient. But as a matter of fact, from a cognitive and therefore let's say collective vision, there is not really distinction between religiosity and spirituality. It is the same, just the spirituality is more messed up, more misty, more kind of like romantic, it's more glamour, if you like, more smoky, foggy, and also since people nowadays they do not like the structure, the control of religions, they think that is something cool to rely to this sort of like ideological and completely false sense of freedom, which that the act of taking shelter in whatever form of spiritual ideology seems to deliver, while it's completely false. So we have to say also something else. Why do we have spiritual beliefs? We have to say that, and we have to acknowledge that the whole spiritual searching is something that springs out always from confusion. Because if a person would be interested to analyze skeptically his or her own confusion, that person will not rely to a spiritual mindset.
It also springs out from escaping reality and responsibility.
That's precisely. So let's explain this in this way. Just like I said before, if I am confused, but I'm also interested to logically analyze, to use my intelligence, to decrypt, also to debate with other people about the very structure of my confusion, then my rational thinking, my mind will never rely on the most crazy things, such as the law of attraction, the channeling of aliens, angels, the Brettarianism, and all of those modern made up and messed up ideologies.
But people think that by believing this, it makes them safe. They think that if they believe this, they will go to heaven or will ascend. Like this is some kind of a reward idea without questioning if they will actually like it.
Well, we have to say something. Again, very straight. Fundamentally, all those credulous minds, or religious minds, which is pretty much the same, or ideological minds, which is always the same. First of all is ideology. People do not really care about such things like the law of attraction, or God, or the angels, or the aliens. They do not really care fundamentally from at the very bottom of their cognition. They don't care about these things. They follow those things. They are the followers, but they don't care about that. What they fundamentally care about is that to the very act of taking shelter in those personal and collective ideas delivers a sense of security, psychological security. They care about feeling safe. I mean, it is also a form of community, especially nowadays with the social networks, a sort of virtual family. Really, people that maybe are struggling with their loneliness, their confusion, by putting the in plenty of groups, and there are plenty of groups that share the most ridiculous things, like the Galactic Federation of Light, the Law of Attraction, The Secret, and so on. They have, even if it is completely virtual, because they never even met with each other, they create a fallacious sense of family that fallaciously makes them feel kind of safe, or at least more safe than what they were before. But this is actually not safety at all. It's actually quite dangerous, because as long as they remain in those fields, so long then progressively something goes wrong, psychologically speaking. And I came across plenty of people that follow that dynamic with very serious results and problems. Now, this is a big issue that is not something to be kind of under-evaluated or covered up with political correctness, talking about the freedom of speech. Of course they have the freedom of speech. We are not touching that, which is sacrosanct, obviously. But what we are trying to say, also what we are doing as EOF project, is an attempt to bring, to place the analysis of this modern phenomenology, which is very dangerous in terms of also mental health, to bring this in the field of education. And by education, we are not just referring to the schooling system, but even the personal education. A person educates himself or herself continuously, every single day, by reading a book, watching TV, watching especially the internet, scrolling down the homepage on Facebook, reading all of those things that most likely are just mumbo-jumbo article or pseudoscience. This is what we are doing. Also, a part of what we are doing as EOF project, which is also why we are working with Cambridge University, and this is also pretty much related to the documentary we are realizing, the title of which is an investigation into our gambling with our psyche, in order to at least throw a little bit of seeds of clear intelligence, evolutionary intelligence, and fresh understanding, so to prevent really much the spreading, the ramification, which is, by the way, very quick, of this modern credulity.
We are trying to understand how a person can go from being a logical, rational thinker into succumbing to the most credulous of thinking. It's really, really shocking and really curious how it can happen so quickly.